Thank you very much, Dr. Elfer, and I'll try to live up to that billing. You know, when I went to Congress back in 1974, I was 30 years old. I've been around that town now for 42 years. And as I told Alex early, it certainly has changed in the time I started there to now. So I'm always happy to be here and speak to you about what's going on and how to make a difference in Washington. Now, how many people here were here from last year? Great. How many people here are new? Let me tell the new people, you are part of a dynamic organization who's doing a lot, all they can do to make difference in people's lives. So welcome aboard. I'm glad to see you here, and it's important that we all do our part. So one of the questions I always ask when I start off is why should I care about federal policy? And my answer is simple. Millions of American lives are impacted by federal policy on sleep issues. You are the experts in the country on dental sleep issues. So let's look at the federal agencies that actually impact the issues. CMS covers Medicare, Medicaid. The Department of Defense cares a lot about the sleep health of our armed forces. The Veterans Administration feels the same way about its veterans. And the Department of Transportation is very concerned about safety issues. So, do you remember those photos that we had last year about all the different accidents that were happening because of sleep problems? Well, here's the one from New York City, for those of you from New York. The train operator on this fell asleep. He had sleep apnea. So the DOT cares a lot about making sure that all of us travel safely. And what happens when they care about stuff equals regulations. They're going to put out some regulations about sleep apnea. And the DOT has three sub-agencies that deal with our issue. The Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration deals with truckers. The FAA deals with pilots. And the Federal Railroad Administration oversees train operators. If you visit their website, each of these agencies will show you what they're doing in dealing with the issue of sleep. They all have regulations on how to deal with truckers, how you deal with pilots, how you deal with train operators, and how they have to be screened for sleep apnea. These agencies decide who gets screened, what qualifies as acceptable treatment, and how to define compliance. The problem is that the federal government is not fully informed about dental sleep medicine. That means that millions of Americans may not be getting access to oral appliance therapy. I first got involved back in 2013 when Dr. Elfer was treating me for sleep apnea. Dr. Elfer told me that his colleagues were very frustrated with the U.S. Department of Transportation. The DOT was putting out a guidance for truckers with sleep apnea. The guidance did not allow truckers to be treated by oral appliances. They said it wasn't acceptable. Now, if you think about truckers, many of them would be perfect candidates for oral appliances. They're constantly mobile. You can wear an oral appliance during the day while you're driving. It's cost effective. So what we did, at Dr. Elfer's insistence and Dr. Klein's insistence, we put a group together and made our case to the FMCSA. The meeting was supposed to last about 45 minutes to an hour. It lasted 3 hours. And I can guarantee you that at the end of our meeting with them, they knew a heck of a lot more about oral appliances. But that was just one meeting. It wasn't enough to fix the problem. So last year, At the 2016 ASBA meeting, we presented you with an opportunity to get involved. Department of Transportation asked for public comments on proposed rulemaking dealing with sleep apnea. How many of you remember that from last year? That's it. Great. Well, the advance notice of proposed rulemaking was issued by the FMCSA and the Federal Railroad Administration. They wanted input, and I quote, the evaluation of safety-sensitive personnel from moderate to severe obstructive sleep apnea, end quote. The regulators were looking for comments from experts like you. They needed to address issues in the screening, diagnosis, treatment, and compliance tracking for sleep apnea. This was the opening for you to make your case on oral appliance therapy. And remember, all those comments that were put in the public record are still in the public record. We asked you to go into their websites and enter comments and attach documents with scientific data. Our goal was to get oral appliance in the front row. And here we are, a year later, and I want to give you an update for those of you who were here last year and for the new ones. I'm happy to report that a lot of people in this room took the time out of their busy schedules to enter comments in the Federal Register. It was a fabulous job. When I spoke to you last April, there were only 139 comments on record. After I spoke to you, there were over 600 comments. A disproportionate number of these comments are from dental sleep experts. The comments submitted by people in this room included substantive information and dental sleep medicine. Many of you included multiple attachments with scientific data. It was just a fabulous amount of information was sent into the federal government. And when I spoke to you last year, there were 0 comments that mentioned oral appliances as a viable treatment for truckers with sleep apnea. After I spoke to you, again, you guys did a great job. There were 53 comments that mentioned oral appliances. This screenshot shows a selection of comments that randomly show up on the front page. And I'm going to take a little time here, because I think it's important, and read you some of the excerpts from the comments. Here's a comment by the American Association of Sleep Technologists. Quote, technologists are trained to monitor the effects of CPAP modalities and oral appliances and provide education to patients and caregivers. The AAST feels that the current state of art does not permit endorsement of a single methodology for screening, evaluation, or treatment. The medical examiners should evaluate each driver individually and make a judgment about fitness for duty based on these criteria, end quote. That is a great case for leveling the playing field between CPAPs and oral appliances. If CPAP is better, fine. But if oral appliance is better, it should be fine also. It's up to the medical examiner based on the individual circumstances, is what they said. Now here's a comment from a big player in the industry, the American Trucking Association. It's a long quote, but I think it's important. Quote, drivers should have a wide variety of treatment options depending on their particular needs as determined by their physicians. They should include, but not be necessarily limited to, CPAP, oral appliances, and certain surgical procedures. While CPAP is most frequently prescribed to treat OSA, many individuals are unable to tolerate it and limit their use or quit the treatment altogether. According to our survey, 21% of truckers that utilize CPAP to treat their OSA do not find it to be effective. Pretty interesting, do not find it to be effective. Oral appliances can be an effective treatment alternative for many of these patients. Oral appliances have not previously been considered as a treatment option because there was no mechanism to ensure driver adherence. But there are appliances on the market today that have a micro recorder installed in the appliance that can detect and record usage and transmit the information to a carrier, a sleep professional, or a medical examiner, end quote. That's from the ATA. And when you have a player that big on our side, that's a huge step forward because they weren't that way a couple of years ago. So if you look further, you will see that of the 7 comments that randomly show up on the front page, 4 of them are related to the work of the ASBA. You dominated this comment section. And let me read you just 3 names that you would recognize. Dr. Aaron Elliott, Dr. Mark Katz, and Dr. Harry Sugg. If we were to scroll further down in the comments, we would see many of your names there too. And look at this impressive submission from members of Congress. That comment is a direct result of the efforts of the ASBA. It's a letter sent by 3 members of the California delegation of the United States House of Representatives, from Congresswoman Anna Eshoo, Congressman Sam Farr, and Congressman Mike Honda. When federal regulators see a letter from a member of Congress, they tend to pay attention. So let me quote a couple of pieces from that letter. Quote, all different methods of treatment should be given equal consideration, end quote. Quote, there's a tremendous amount of evidence and scientific data regarding the effectiveness of oral appliance therapy. There are many individuals who respond better to oral appliance therapy. Given that transportation workers' compliance with prescribed treatment plan is directly connected to public safety, it is critical that sleep apnea patients have access to the most effective treatment option available for his or her circumstances, end quote. I don't know anyone who could have stated your case more clearly than those 3 members of Congress. So in addition to submitting comments last year, it also helps to present your case in person. Then we had a star do it in May 2016 in front of the FMCSA. Dr. Richard Klein flew from Detroit, came down to Washington, D.C., and made a presentation publicly to the FMCSA. Not only was he that effective, he was only supposed to speak for 5 minutes. Of course, those of you who know Dr. Klein know that's almost impossible. But they kept him on for another 45 minutes to get more information from him. That's how effective that was. That's the ASBA doing its job. And in September of 2016, there was a joint presentation on Capitol Hill by ASBA, the Pro Health Health Alliance, and the Alpha Center. This was an in-depth briefing to the Energy and Commerce Subcommittee on Communications and Technologies. And here are some of the presenters who were there for several hours. Dr. Neil Seltzer, Dr. David Singh, Dr. Richard Klein, Dr. Rudy Ferrati, Dr. Kent Smith, David Gergen, NFL great Roy Green, and it was moderated by Dr. Elfer. What a lineup. So let's all take a deep breath and enjoy a view from the Bell Rock. You ever been up to Sedona yet? Anybody who's been up to Sedona? Don't miss this. It's something to behold. And one of the things I want to do is to give a big shout out and applaud all the individuals who did all that work last year. So shout it out. Let's hear it all. Yeah. It was remarkable what you all accomplished last year, and you got better things coming up for you to do in the future. As I said earlier, I've been in Washington 42 years. It's hard to believe. I only had 1 son at the time. Now I got 2 kids and 5 grandkids, so that's progress, I guess. The one thing I've learned in after those 42 years is that only constant is change. You can't ever think that you can tame the beast. It's not possible. The federal government is just too big and it's too complex. So you've got to keep pressing your case day in and day out. So let's get to the rest of the story. Let me show you, this is how the regulatory process works. After all these comments were received, they then go to the so-called famous Medical Review Board. I'm not sure what planet they're on, but there's a Medical Review Board. There are 5 medical professions on this board, none of whom are dental sleep experts. And frankly, my challenge to you, we got to do something about that. There's ways to get on that board, and we got to get a dental sleep expert on that board. Their job is to review all the information and come up with recommendations. Back in 2012, the Medical Review Board came up with the following statement on oral appliances, and I quote, "There is limited data regarding compliance and long-term efficacy of dental appliances, and these technologies are not approved at this time," end quote. Brilliant. That's the exact statement that got Dr. Elfer, Dr. Klein, and his colleagues so darn angry back in 2013. So let's jump forward in time. What did the Medical Review Board say in its August 2016 report after receiving all your great input? The good news is that there is an entire section about oral appliances as an acceptable treatment option. Finally, they got it. I'm convinced that the only reason they did do that is because of all the work done by the people in this room over the last year. The reason this is important is because medical examiners have to follow what the MRB recommends. In the past, the MRB said no to oral appliances. That meant that even if a trucker was successful with an oral appliance, he still couldn't be cleared to drive. Now, they finally acknowledged that an oral appliance is an acceptable treatment. So that's progress. But there's more work to do to ensure a level playing field. Remember all those comments I read to you earlier? About leaving it up to the individual circumstances of trucker being examined? Equalizing treatment options? Well, I'm sorry to say that the MRB, in an August report, still is putting their thumb on the scale towards CPAP. Here are some excerpts from the MRB report. Quote, "There is a limited data regarding compliance and long-term efficacy of oral appliance," end quote. What world are these people in? Quote, "Based on the available evidence, drivers are less likely to achieve resolution with an oral appliance therapy." I guess they don't read English. I mean, we must have sent it in the wrong language. I'm sure most of the people in this room would disagree with those comments. I certainly do. Here are some experts from the recommendations. Quote, "A driver with a diagnosis of moderate to severe OSA should try CPAP therapy before oral appliance therapy," end quote. "Based on the available medical literature, CPAP is the preferred OSA treatment," quote, end quote. All of that defies logic. Considering all the information and the scientific data that you sent in, they still come to this conclusion. We made a lot of progress by having them accept the fact that oral appliance is an alternative. But they still have their finger on the scale to help CPAP. And part of that reason is there's no dental sleep experts on the Medical Review Board. And that's got to be a priority. So let me tell you what my reaction to that is. Number one, we made a lot of progress. They didn't totally shut us out. They did say we're an alternative treatment. There's an acknowledgement that oral appliance therapy has a seat at the table. And the second reaction is that there's a lot more work to do. You need more medical literature and sleep dental science available to them. There's a lot more education that needs to be done. You've done a great job so far. You just can't sit back on your laurels. You've got more education to do. So that brings us to the next steps. The regulatory process at the FMCSA is on hold right now, and the reason for that is that the new Republican administration is slow getting started. There are many empty positions at the top of these agencies. As you know, Republicans are people who like to do less regulating, but in this particular case, we want the regulatory process to go because we want that preference of CPAP to be challenged. So based on what I'm seeing in Washington, I don't think much will be done on those regulations anytime soon. So that gives us an opportunity to continue to have impact on it. And your leaders are keeping a close eye on what's going on. So that brings me back to my original question. Why should you care about all this talk about truckers? And maybe you don't even have a trucker in your practice. And here's my answer. The issue that you're facing at the FMCSA is the same issue you're facing in the marketplace. Too many people think CPAP is the only answer to sleep disorders. So that's why my advice to you is to do more education, publish more medical literature, create more case studies, gather more data, create videos that explain how oral appliances work. We need to continue to push the agencies and push the MRB. And sometimes you just ought to cut out the middleman. Go to the truckers, go to the pilots, go to the train operators. Before I left Washington, I attended a meeting that Dr. Elford set up with the Independent Truckers Association. They are on our side. They want their members to have access to whatever solution works best for them. The biggest issue is that it's hard to get the word out to independent truckers who are on the road all the time. They would love to have educational materials from you to pass on to their members. You provide a very, very important solution to millions of people who are suffering from sleep disorders. Many of them cannot tolerate CPAP. You can make a difference in their lives. But you can't make a difference unless they know about you. So my challenge to this group is to create a central repository of educational materials about oral appliances and how they're used to treat sleep disorder. Put it on the website. Constantly update the website. Share it with the MRB in a respectful manner. I know sometimes it's hard to do that when people are so biased against you, but you got to win them over. My dad just telling me, you get more giving people honey than vinegar, so we got to give them a little more honey. So we're going to share it with the FMCSA. We're going to share it with the independent truckers. We're going to share it with pilot and railway operators. Use your expertise to make a difference in people's lives. The only reason I'm here speaking to you is because dental sleep science has made a difference in my life. Sleep is important. Thank you for your dedication to helping people. We just have to keep winning the battles because in the end, we'll win the war. So thank you, and I'll here for whatever questions that you may have. Well, that's really exciting. I did end the speech.